Modernism versus postmodernism. Global warfare is one of the defining characteristics of the modern period. At the first, global war is the subject of the theme of this period, representing the Great War. Another of the defining characteristic of modern is the radical artistic experiment. Boundary breaking art, literature, and music from the first decade of the century are the subject of the modernist experiment theme. Focuses on two periods of crisis when the violent struggle for independence put the greatest pressure on literature attempts to imagine of the nation. After the 1916 Easter Rising and the subsequent outbreak of sectarian violence in 1969, known as the Trouble or Problema in Northern Ireland. The years before World War I saw the beginning of the poetic revolution. The Imaginist movement arose as a reaction against romantic blurriness and emotionalism in poetry. By the end of the century, modernism had given way to the striking pluralism of postmodernism and postcolonialism. Postmodernism. The setting moved from the countryside to the city. Science fiction and fantasy shows the world's flaws and hopes. Many saw in postmodernism an emancipation from the institutional straitjacket of culture, while others, in turn, saw postmodernism as an abandonment of social and intellectual responsibility that was symptomatic of a culture decline with the rise of the last years. Postmodernism tends to focus on reconceptualizing notion of subjectivity and genre, concept of the temporality, history, space and place, and power relation between races, ethnicity, and different cultures, spheres of influence in global community. Postmodern literature, like postmodernism, is difficult to define, and there is little agreement on the exact characteristics, scope, and importance of postmodern literature. However, the unifying feature often coincides with Jean Francois Lyotard's concept of meta-narrative and small narrative, Jacques Derrida's concept of game, and Jean Baudrillard's simulacrum. In postmodernity, people are inundated with information, and that technology has become a central focus in many lives. In our understanding of the real is mediated by simulation of the real. Many works of fiction have treated this aspect of postmodernism with characteristic irony and pastiche. Steampunk, a science fiction subgenre popularized in novels and comics by writers such as Alan Moore and James Blaylock, demonstrate postmodern pastiche, time warp, and a focus on technoculture with its mix of futuristic technology and Victorian culture. As can be seen, I didn't mention the event that occurred in this era. I wanted to focus on the influence that the modernist and postmodernist period had on literature, art, and the literary genres. Life of author. Eric Arthur Blair, known as George Orwell, was born in 1903 in a British colony in India. At the age of 2, he traveled to England with his mother and sisters. There he grew up and study. He had a certain hatred for British imperialism, and he joined in the Indian Imperial Police in Burma, but declined and returning to England, proclaiming his hatred of imperialism. This event inspired him to write Burmese Days. Later, he lived in Paris and London, where he wrote down a note in Paris and London. There he used the name George after the monarch of the United Kingdom, George V, and Orwell after the river of the same name. He participated in the Spanish Civil War to assassinate fascists, and in the World War II, where he wrote Wartime Diary 1940 until 1942. Then, between 1947 and 1948, he wrote one of his most recognizing work, 1984, and published on June 8, 1949, showing a dystopian world that is not far from our reality. Writing style. Style and Writing 2022 marks the 72nd anniversary of the death of the renowned British journalist George Orwell. Also a prestigious novelist, essayist, and critic, Orwell is known worldwide for his sober, clean, fluid, and concise writing style, and his fight against careless and unclear prose. The British journalist left us in the aforementioned essay 6 Keys to Writing Clearly, which serve as a guide to improve our daily writing and be more precise in our communication. These are: first, avoid using metaphors, comparison and rhetorical figures that you are used to saying, writing. Clichés lose their original evocative power. Second, avoid, whenever you can, long words or composition. Use a short alternative. 3. Eliminate any words you can do without. Make your text shorter. 4. Avoid the passive voice. Use the active voice whenever you can. 5. Avoid using foreign words or technical terms, even if you understand them. Think about your audience and simplify your message. And 6. Break any of the above rules before writing nonsense. Setting of the story. The story narrated by Orwell takes place in a manor farm and estate in the England that belonged to Mr. Jones. It was published on August 17 in 1945, days before the end of the Second World War. At first glance, a small fable about animals and a farm, but over time it became a key word to understand not only the time in which it arose, but also the war, what would come after World War II. 75 years after its publication, those dangers that Orwell sensed for his time and the near future seems not to have been fully overcome. A key work of the 20th century closely linked to the life experience of its author, which deserves to be remembered again. Criteria of period. The author reflects in a satirical way the different stages of the Russian Revolution, from its theoretical foundation to the stage of Soviet bureaucratization contemporary to the same book, under the command of Joseph Stalin, as well as the birth of fascism in Germany, Italy, or Spain, in whose civil war Orwell participated, with which the main powers of the world were at war while this book was being written. Considering the event, the years of the publication, and the other data researched about the author, I can estimate that it will reflect the postmodernist period, since it has an ironic tone against modernism. On the other hand, it has a simple language for the reading public and a criticism of government and how they handled society with power, arrogance, and injustice, which marked a deviation from modernism. Summary of the plot. The story begins with Mr. Jones, the owner of Manor Farm, a drunk who didn't take good care of his animals. Luckily, on the farm there is a wise pig, Old Major. Old Major urges all the animals, neglected by his owner, to rebel and run the farm themselves, with one important condition, equal condition for all, but then he dies. It seems like a great idea to every young, except Benjamin, a cynical donkey, whose main role in life is to be a cynic. So they rebel. Then the animals get tired of the mistreatment and attack their owner and the workers, killing their owner. Naturally, the pigs, who are the most intelligent animals, takes the lead. And here came the idea of equality, and also the vision the old major had that the coup d'etat be peaceful, since immediately a conflict arises between two pigs, Napoleon and Snowball, while the former wants to do nothing and being in charge of everything. The latter wants to teach the other animals and build a windmill. Needless to say, Snowball's plan is much better, so he wins. Instead, Napoleon uses his private army of 9 big, ferocious dogs to become the almighty chief pig of domineering leadership. With Snowball left out of the picture, the other pigs blame him for everything. They exploit the other animals without disgust, breaking all the rules of equality that they had established after the rebellion. Life on the farm gets worse. The animals forget old Major's original dream, and the pig make some very unhappy decision when dealing with neighboring farm. The disaster comes to a head when the pigs send out Boxer, a hard-working and loyal horse who is about to tired to be killed. In short, pigs look an awful lot like the horrible human being that started his whole mess, and they even walk on 2 legs. Indeed, they may even be worse than they are. Characters. The main characters. First, Old Major, a pig who is also the wisest animal on the farm. He encourages the other animals to rebel against Farmer Jones with his ideas, though he died before seeing the animal triumph in battle. He represents Lenin, for creating his own doctrine and devising a revolution, and Karl Marx for his anti-capitalist philosophy. Napoleon. Napoleon was a large, ferocious-looking bird, the only Berkshire pig on the farm. In short, he had a reputation for always getting his way. Napoleon is a pig who, being quite intelligent, takes over, along with Snowball, the farm. This character represents greed and the ambition for power. He concerns those people who oppress and exploit others for their own well-being, make promises they don't keep, bend laws to their own advantage, and are absorbed in power, which means they don't care about any young or anything. It represents Joseph Stalin. Snowball, a brave pig who led the other animals in the revolution that overthrew Farmer John. He plans to restore the farm, naming it Animal Farm, and plans to encourage reading, teamwork, and fairness among the animals, spreading animalism to other farms. Napoleon takes charge of forcibly exile him and consider him a traitor. He represents Leon Trotsky. Conflict. Napoleon, ambitious, decided to do business with neighboring farm, forcing the animal to greatly increase in production. The power began to go to his head, and the situation worsened considerably. The other animals had less and less food and more work. The leader even forbade the animals from singing the song they loved so much, Animals of England, arguing that it only worked at the time of the revolution. Napoleon declared that it was beneficial to trade the product of the farm with the man, including Frederick, who made a farm coup. The disagreement escalated into a real conflict in which property was trespassed and many animals were killed in battle. The conflict is a character versus society. The conflict occurs when the character goes against in the laws or their society, a tyrannical government, or an unfair community mentality. Usually the protagonist is an altruistic or idealistic individual who sees injustice and wants to correct it for his world. Why Animal Farm is considered an allegory. Animal Farm as an allegory, this term is closely linked to the concept with metaphor. In this way, Animal Farm is shown as an allegory based on animal character that change their way of being, and that represent humans and their changes with respect to power. In the chapter 7, Orwell focuses again on the gap between the tireless labor of animals and the benefit they receive. We discussed earlier that because Stalin focuses more on heavy industry than consumer products, the Soviet people faced shortage of the thing they need most. Due to chronic shortage in the Soviet Union, the cliché of queuing for almost anything one wanted arose, including food and toilet paper. When one wanted to buy a large item, like a car, an example, one was put at the bottom of a seemingly endless list. Moreover, Stalin's focus on heavy industry was matched by his name, and meaning steel, which he chose for himself. Stalin was born with a much more ethnically specific surname, Shugashvili. Napoleon began to shield himself from public scrutiny and has Quiller and the dogs do his dirty work. This is in keeping with Starling's habit of being a figure in the shadow. Starling gave order from the comfort of his office, while the propagandists and secret police met out their demand and punishment of him. The timber negotiation represents Starling's support of the production of heavy industry.